Oh boy, guys, I gotta say that I was kind of disappointed with this movie because when I saw the poster and when I saw what the character Megan looked like, I thought that this was going to be a documentary about the lost Olsen twin because I've actually made this joke many times in in recent months. Megan looks like an Olsen twin, like she really does. It looks like one of the Olsen twins if they were possessed by the devil and decided to go on a killing spree. But anyway, that's my opening joke. Welcome to yet another episode of Around the Clock Frights. My name is Josh, and today we're going to be talking about the first major horror release of 2023. A January horror release, no less. And for those familiar with the horror genre, January is usually Hollywood's favorite time of the year to take a ginormous crap, because we've had some really terrible January horror movies in the past. There have been some exceptions, of course, like Split, M. Night Shyamalan's Split, but M3GAN is a film that, honestly, I kind of forgot about until I saw some recent trailers, because it was one of those films that just kind of came out of nowhere. Like, I saw on Blumhouse's Instagram that they were releasing this film called M3GAN, and it honestly sounded fine. Like, I wasn't too intrigued by the premise because, let's be honest, we've had a number of films about killer artificial intelligence over the years. In fact, a couple years ago, we had a pretty average remake of Child's Play starring no less than freaking Luke Skywalker as Chucky, which, you might hate me for this, but I actually thought that film was pretty decent. But case in point, I didn't really think M3GAN was going to be, anything to write home about. I thought it was going to be one of the more average Blumhouse releases, something like the first Purge movie or 2019's Ma, something like that, something that was overall decent, but didn't really leave much of an impression. But I gotta say, this film was actually a bit more clever than I was anticipating, and it definitely had its moments. You all know me, like, I really like having characters in a horror movie that I can relate to or root for, and this film actually did a very good job in setting up its characters and their dilemmas. In fact, Allison Williams' character, she plays this woman who works at this popular toy company. And, she's trying to design the next big thing because she's under a lot of pressure from her boss, and she needs to create this revolutionary toy that's gonna wow the masses. And the little girl, played by Violet McGraw, who has been in some other horror releases, has recently lost her parents in a tragic car accident. And so you immediately get this dynamic. Allison Williams is Violet McGraw's aunt, and she is forced to take this little girl under her wing, and she is not prepared to be a guardian at all. In fact, she is very ill-equipped. Her house is filled with priceless collectibles. She has no experience with children whatsoever, so you get a little bit of conflict there, and I thought that was actually pretty decent. What were my overall thoughts on M3GAN? I thought it was above average. I thought it was pretty decent. I thought it had a very good setup, but the conclusion I thought was actually pretty lame and standard, which we'll definitely get into. And it's kind of funny that this film was produced by James Wan, because James Wan, created another creepy horror movie doll, that being the Annabelle doll, which has been featured in a number of films. So basically, what this film really has going for it is its commentary. There is some pretty decent commentary about the state of modern technology. How parents out there will just allow their kids to essentially be raised by technology, even though they try to limit their kids' amount of screen time, the amount of time they use their technological devices on a day-by-day basis. It doesn't always work, and parents can become kind of lazy, and they allow technology to essentially raise their children. So that's this film's hook, and that's basically what this film comments on, and it honestly does a pretty effective job in places. Violet McGraw does end up spending a lot of time with this M3GAN doll. She becomes very attached to it, and she essentially becomes distracted by her real life problems. The tragedy of losing her parents. The M3GAN doll has become a really big distraction. And as mentioned earlier, we've had plenty of films and TV series with killer robots, and there's been a lot of commentary about technology over the years. So does this film do anything different to make it stand out from the productions like Child's Play or even Black Mirror, a pretty good series overall, which is all about modern technology and the dangers it presents? Honestly, not really. In fact, I thought this film was going to have a slightly more clever conclusion because the thing about Blumhouse movies is, Jason Blum, he's a very powerful producer, and his thing is he likes to give, his directors very low budgets to work with because his thing is, if you give a director a low budget, they can, feel free to experiment. They can do essentially whatever they want. And so if a film costs, $1 or $2 million, but it's still a quote-unquote failure at the box office, it's no big loss because it was still very cheap to make. So the problem with that is, I feel like sometimes a Blumhouse film's budget can kind of hinder its potential a little bit, because I'm going to get into some mild spoilers. So of course the M3GAN doll, ends up going on a killing spree. The horror sequences in this were pretty good. There are a couple of good, effective kills, and it does give horror fans, what they crave in a movie like this. Although it doesn't get too gory or over the top. In fact, the kills in this are pretty, I'm not gonna say tame, but they're not too crazy. So anyway, after a while, Allison Williams realizes that the M3GAN doll is probably not safe, and it probably shouldn't be sold to the masses. So what ends up happening is the final confrontation in this movie takes place inside this house, and every house in a Blumhouse movie looks exactly the same. Just the same house we see in so many of these Blumhouse movies like Sinister, The Purge, and a number of these features. Just these middle-class houses that are kind of bland looking, and they all have the same interior design. But not to give too much away, but the final confrontation does take place inside a house. And with a premise like this, the conclusion, in my opinion, should have been much crazier and much more bombastic. I was actually recently rewatching Child's Play 2, and at the end of that film, the heroes confront Chucky inside this enormous warehouse, which is filled with all of these other Chucky dolls. And, they end up defeating Chucky with some of the technology, inside this warehouse. And it's a very exciting conclusion, and it's visually appealing. It's, fun to watch. It's fun to look at. When you have a conclusion that takes place in this bland, just everyday house, it doesn't make things particularly exciting, no matter how intimidating, the villain is, because the M3GAN doll, I was actually taking her pretty seriously, as a legitimate threat. I mean, this film is pretty campy. It does have some campy moments. There's literally a scene where, she is dancing in a dark hallway. She's, flipping around doing all these ridiculous dance moves. And so at least this film is self-aware, but I do feel like the low budget of this film was kind of a hindrance because, earlier in the movie, we see, this commercial where we see these other M3GAN dolls, and it would have been so much more exciting if the final confrontation took place, inside this big, corporate office. Maybe you can have like all these different M3GAN dolls, running around, running amok. It's set up that there's going to be like this press conference, which is going to be the big reveal of the M3GAN doll. Why not have something where, you have just all these different, M3GAN dolls coming to life and just brutally slaughtering people. And I brought up the Child's Play remake, which came out a few years earlier, which granted was not very well loved by horror fans, but honestly, I thought it was entertaining enough. And at the end of the Child's Play remake, you have essentially the same premise. They're unveiling this new Chucky doll, and there's a crowd of people there, and what ends up happening is that the Chucky doll takes over all these different technological devices. Like, you have all these drones flying around and killing people. There's a hilarious moment where Chuck, stabs a guy in the neck, and blood gushes all over this little girl's face. I wanted something like that in M3GAN. I wanted something that was just completely over the top and campy, but instead we got a standard Blumhouse conclusion, and the way they destroy the M3GAN doll is pretty clever, and it's it's a payoff from something we saw earlier in the film, but I thought it kind of ended on a whimper, and this film should have had a more exciting conclusion, especially with such a good build-up.
M3GAN! What's wrong with you?
And it does take a while for it to actually become a horror movie. In fact, there are some cheap horror movie tricks that are present in this film, and they kind of annoy the hell out of me. Earlier in the film, before Megan's even introduced, there's a jump scare that is caused by this dog, which comes out of nowhere. And animal jump scares, those are just so innovative, and I love them. I love it when an animal just pops up out of nowhere and startles a character, because that isn't something we've seen a million other times in other horror movies. In addition, there's a scene where two characters are talking in a quiet room, and you see the M3GAN doll, sitting in the background, being very still, and it'll cut away to another character, and when it cuts back, the M3GAN doll has suddenly disappeared, and oh god, she's actually standing right next to the character. Like, oh my god, like, oh man, freaking, like, just amazing, which is a cheat because it's established that this doll is like very, you can hear it coming, you can hear like it moving, like the gears and like the gizmos inside it are whirring, so I don't think it would be able to sneak up on somebody. It's not a quiet toy. So there are some cheap horror movie tricks like that, and the kills, as mentioned, are pretty decent, especially for a PG-13 horror movie, which, by the way, guys, just because a horror movie is rated PG-13, it doesn't mean it's going to disappoint. I mean, we've had plenty of effective PG-13 horror movies over the years. One of my favorite modern-day horror films is actually Sam Raimi's Drag Me to Hell. And let's even look at Blumhouse's own category. You have films like Insidious. Insidious is rated PG-13, and it is still very creepy, and it's still very unnerving, and James Wan did a lot with a small budget that he had. So yes, M3GAN is definitely above average. It's nowhere near being awful. It has characters that you can sympathize with. It has, characters that you can, root for, and it has some good commentary. But so many things about it felt typical, and I thought there was going to be some sort of twist at the end, but there wasn't really, and it didn't overall satisfy me. There were parts that satisfied me, but I just wanted something more complete and more thrilling, if that makes sense. But yes, guys, is it worth a trip to the movie theater? I would say so. I mean, it's not often we get a legitimately decent horror movie in January. I mean, January is famous for gifting horror fans with horror masterpieces. Remember The Devil Inside? Oh, The Devil Inside was just such a masterpiece. It was just meticulously crafted, and it's one of the great modern horror classics. Oh, The Devil Inside just makes me feel all warm inside. I'm just joshing you. Ha! I've got plenty of jokes today. Ain't I a doll? Anyway, guys, M3GAN, pretty decent. Definitely not terrible. So definitely check it out. 2023 has just begun. We have a number of really exciting horror films to look forward to. I actually just released a video where I talk about my most anticipated horror movies of 2023, and the year has just begun. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts as well. Have you seen M3GAN yet? What were your thoughts? Do you think it's just another, Child's Play ripoff, trying to create another iconic killer doll? Please let me know your thoughts down below, guys. I'd love to hear them, and definitely got some more exciting things in the works. As mentioned in my last interview, I would like to reach out to more horror celebrities and actually interview them on camera. I did that with Casey Hartnett, one of the stars of Terrifier 2, and I had a really good time doing that, so that's something I would definitely like to do more on this channel. But of course, I have more videos talking about horror movies coming up in the near future. Just before this movie, I got trailers for stuff like Knock at the Cabin, the new M. Night Shyamalan opus. I say that with a higher pitched voice because the last film he made, Old, was pretty terrible. So I'm hoping he got his groove back. The trailer for Knock at the Cabin looked decent, and Scream 6 has an eerie trailer at least. But yeah, guys, thank you so much for joining me in my discussion of M3GAN. If nothing else, I'm sure this film is going to inspire people to make videos of them dancing, doing the creepy M3GAN dance like in the hallway. Although I don't think it's going to be as popular as the Wednesday Addams dance. That thing just really exploded. Anyway, guys, if you like this, please subscribe to my channel, Round the Clock Frights, for more horrific content. And as always, have a very scary day, boils and ghouls. Have a very happy new year. Stay safe, stay scary, and maybe don't buy your children creepy-ass dolls that will most likely kill people. Just kind of common sense. Anyway, guys, take care, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.